Hello and welcome to the R26 kit assembly guide video. We're going to make an R26 kit. So yeah, you can follow along. I would recommend reading the documentation on the website as well as watching this video because I won't cover absolutely everything that you need to know to assemble your kit. There could be things that I miss. So let's go ahead and get started. So here is a kit. This is how your order will come. You'll have a main bag with a smaller bag and some other components inside. You'll have a foam roll with your acrylic back plate, your PCB and plate, and then you'll have your case with your brackets. For many of you, you probably have printed these parts yourself, and then you might have already printed your back plate as well yourself, but you'll need all those items to assemble your kit. To get started, let's undo the foam roll. We can just set that aside. And then let's also empty out these components. So it's a good idea to just check that you have everything. Obviously I can make mistakes when I put these together, but so if I have missed an item in your order, just send us an email and we'll get that shipped out to you as soon as we can. The quantities for what you need specifically is on the guides page, so I'm not going to go over that now because you can just read it. Okay. So yeah, you should have some diodes, keyboard feet, a bunch of hardware, an encoder, and then if you did select switches when you ordered, then you'll have the switches. Otherwise, you'll need your own, as well as a knob. Okay. So the first thing to do is to get the PCB ready. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's put these things to the side. So you'll need all of the diodes. We include at least 10 diodes, but you really only need 9. The 10th one is in case you mess one up. With your diodes, you're going to want to bend them and then insert them into the holes. So you'll just hold the diode like this and kind of bend it like that. And then these diodes go into these diode holes, these footprints. And you'll want to match up the black line with the line on the silk screen. So this just goes in like this, place it in all the way, and then bend these pins on the back so that they stay. And you'll just repeat that for all 9 diodes. Make sure not to forget the encoder diode. That one is easy to forget. And when I bend these pins, I usually bend them like away from the other pads. Okay, so now that all the diodes are in place, you're going to want to solder them. So you can either solder them from this side or that side. It doesn't really matter at all. I would recommend using flux core solder. It will help out quite a bit. Okay, quickly verify that you've got all the connections, and then we'll proceed. Okay, it looks like I got them all. So then you'll want to use some flush cuts and just trim off the excess leads. And try your best not to poke yourself. You can bend these up too. And there you go. Your circuit board should look something like this now. There we go. Now the camera is actually in focus. So we've got the diodes, and then we have the leads trimmed. So the next step is to test the ProMicro. It's important to test it to make sure that it works before you solder it, because desoldering a ProMicro is not fun at all. So you'll want to connect it to your computer with a USB cable, and then you'll also want to flash the firmware. And so that is detailed in a separate guide. We have a universal firmware updating guide on our website, so I'm not going to repeat stuff that's already there, but yeah, you want to flash the firmware and then just make sure that the computer recognizes it as an R26 Macropad. If you have issues with that, please contact us and we can send you another ProMicro. These every now and then these do come dead. So okay, so after you've verified that the ProMicro works, we're going to want to solder it to the PCB. So you'll want to put the headers in so that the longer leads go through the ProMicro like this. And I would recommend trimming these. These have to be trimmed. And so I would actually recommend doing that before soldering. However, they can certainly be trimmed afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and do that before. So you'll need a pair of wire cutters. You can use something like these flush cuts, but they tend to be weaker and they might damage your flush cuts. So I'm going to use a little heavier duty wire cutters. And it's a lot easier to cut these before you solder them with wire cutters. So you'll want to just cut like the first 5 or 6 kind of in half, like this. I'm going to do this over my trash can. And it doesn't hurt to just cut them all as well, kind of in half. There we go. I'm going to do that to these as well. There we go. So now these are cut in half. It doesn't have to be perfect, but let's put them through these holes, and it might be a little bit harder now that we've trimmed them, but they should go in. And you'll still want the longer side to go through the ProMicro. If you have long pins facing this way, it'll interfere with the plate. So now that you have something like this, we can just put this on here like that, and then you can begin to solder it. If you have a rubber band, you can use it to kind of hold everything in place like this. So that keeps the ProMicro in place when you solder the connections. So I like to start with the corners. On both sides. Okay. There we go. And so you can remove the rubber band after you've done the corners. Let's get this thing focused. There we go. And then go ahead and solder the rest of the pins. You actually only need to solder this side, the side that's closer to the encoder. On this side, the third and fourth pins are the ground pins, and so they will require a little bit more heat and time for the solder to melt and flow right. So just be aware of that. And like I said earlier, using flux core solder will really help. So like I said, these two pins take a little bit longer to heat up. Okay, and then when you're done with that, go ahead and inspect it. Make sure none of the pins are touching each other and you don't have any shorts. This looks good. All right, so this is the PCB mostly completed. Actually, it is completed. So the next thing we're going to want to do is get the case and install the plate and everything. So the plate is symmetrical going this way, but there is a difference between how you orientate it. You'll notice this little hole here next to the encoder. It needs to be facing southwards, so it needs to be facing towards this larger bracket, these two holes down here. You can either flip it this way or this way. That doesn't matter, but the hole definitely needs to be facing towards you if you're looking at it like this. Another way to tell is when the PCB goes in, the hole for the encoder, the tab for the encoder here needs to be with these 3 pins over here. And then likewise, you'll need to insert the switches in the correct orientation. So from this view, the pins are facing you. So I'm just going to do that. There we go. And so let's go ahead and put these in the right way, or put this in the right way. And we're just going to check that it all fits together well. Looks like it does. So now we can solder the PCB to the switches. And you want to make sure that the switches are flush with the PCB before you start. These switches, the holes are a lot small. The holes are a little bit smaller, so it just rests well on the switches. But you might have to push them in a little bit more. Be careful not to melt your case with your soldering iron as well. You can see I have my iron like this, and then when I go over here, I'm going to flip it upside down. There we go. So now it should be one contained unit, the plate and PCB. The next thing we're going to do is actually install at least a few of the brackets. So you may think that we're going to do the encoder, but I would actually recommend doing the encoder after you put the brackets in, because it will be easier to solder, and you'll see later. So let's go ahead and add some brackets. I'm going to do the top one and the bottom one here. So you'll use the M2.5 socket head screws. Takes a 2mm Allen wrench. And you'll just thread it in, and you'll want to be careful not to strip the threads. It is 3D printed, so you can definitely strip them if you press hard enough, but you shouldn't need to tighten it too tight. I would err on the side of not being tight instead of accidentally stripping the threads. There we go. So now we can flip it over. We don't need to though. Let's put the encoder in, and if you want, you can trim it. I believe you don't need to. So you don't need to trim anything on the encoder like my other macro pads, but you still can. So I'm not going to trim it because I don't need to. So you'll put the encoder in. You'll make sure that the little tab on the encoder goes into the tab here, and that's why it's important to get the plate the right way around. So this goes in like this. Then you'll add the nut and the encoder. And then you'll use a 10mm socket to tighten it. I would recommend a 10mm socket because that works the best, but you can also use pliers. Just be very careful not to scratch the plate and stuff. And I would make sure that it's not super tight, so it needs to be loose. And so now the encoder shaft is kind of sticking out, and when it's on here, it kind of wobbles and stuff. So you can use whatever brackets that you have left to kind of support the macro pad, or you can use some other object. I'm going to use these brackets here. There we go. I kind of want it at an angle. Here we go. Then what we'll do is we'll solder the encoder. We're going to bend these leads down, and it might help to bend them before you put it in the hole, but you don't have to. And then yeah, I need to move this just a little bit. This part is a little awkward because of the shaft. The shaft is just poking through. Okay. So with this as centered as possible, I would start with the switch that is furthest away from you. You get the lead and the wire there. You can also just tin these a little bit. You can tin them, and then you can actually bend these down over it like that. So the leads do not go through the hole. You can use a metal object to hold this pin down as you solder into place. Like that. And you just keep repeating that. I'm actually going to kind of recenter it. So you can, I would start with one pin on the encoder, and then that way you can kind of recenter the encoder after it's in place. There we go, that looks straight and centered. Let's go ahead and do this one. And then do this one. That one needs more solder. And this doesn't have to be perfect. It's in the back side of the case, so as long as it's connected, it should be just fine. The encoder nut and washer will hold it in place, so there won't be any forces acting on these joints. So as long as they're connected, it will be just fine. Then you'll want to connect these switches in a similar fashion to the other ones, or these pins in a similar fashion to the other ones. And then there you go. And you'll want to inspect it and make sure that nothing looks shorted, it all looks connected. So with that soldered, you'll then tighten the encoder so it doesn't move around. And we're almost done. So one of the last steps we're going to do is put the brackets in. So we need hardware for that. And like that, we have the brackets installed. I would recommend plugging it in and testing out the buttons and the encoder before you put on the knob and the keycaps and the back plate. The reason I recommend that is because if you have to reflash the firmware, you'll have to take off the back plate and then short the ground and the reset pins. And so I would recommend just testing it without the back plate for now, and then when you confirm it all works, you can install that. So assuming that it works, I'm not going to test it right now. We'll install the back plate. So you'll take the protective covering off, and if you get it all in one piece, props to you. Okay, then you'll place it on. Then you'll use the 4 M3 button head screws to attach it. And you'll want to loosely screw in each of the 4 screws before you tighten them. And then with all 4 of them started and almost tightened, then you'll just screw it in so that it touches the back plate. And it doesn't need to be tight at all. It just needs to touch it. There you go. there's the back plate installed. You can also then add your keyboard feet, and I tend to put you can put the keyboard feet however you want. You could put it 2 in the back. I would not recommend 1 in the front and 1 in the back. I like to put 1 here and 1 here. And there we go. We're almost done. So the last step is to add the keycaps and the knob. This order doesn't have any keycaps, so I'm not going to actually do that, but it's really easy. You just put them on. For the knob, if you have a delicious sandwich cookie knob, or any other knob that uses that has this sort of mechanism on the bottom, you'll just stick it on like this, and that's all you'll need to do. If you have a aluminum knob, which I'll grab one, you'll need to use the included Allen wrench. So this is a glossy black aluminum knob, and the Allen wrench is used to tighten the set screws. So I like to turn the set screw so that you can barely see it poking, just like that. You can actually turn the encoder without it being tight, and you'll want the set screw to be on the flat part of the shaft here. And you'll notice that you can't really get to the hole here with the case in place. So you'll have to lift the knob up just a tiny bit and then tighten the set screw like this. If you do want the knob all the way down, you can disassemble the case. So you can remove the back plate, remove the brackets, and then pull the pull the plate and PCB out. And then you can install the knob all the way on the shaft, and then you can reassemble the board. However, I don't think that that's entirely necessary. That's only if you want the knob to be, 2 millimeters lower. In order to then remove the knob, you'll have to do that, and you'll have to also do that. So I think it's better just to have the knob raised up a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole assembly. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to send us an email or hop into our Discord server and just ask. We have a lot of people there that are really helpful. But yeah, I hope this assembly video helped you out, and yeah, I hope to see some pictures. I'd love to see pictures of people's kits after they've assembled it. But yeah, thank you for watching, and good luck.